Thank you, Mayor. It's really my pleasure to be here to do this. Meetings are one of my favorite topics. Strangely enough, I know you don't hear that often, but I am a trained facilitator. I have been working most of my career in government and definitely in government and nonprofits. And so I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about government, about good government, and about the art, as well as the law, of effective boards and commission meetings. So a quick thing, and while this is up here, this is actually me when I was board president at the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, which is the nonprofit cable access channel in St. Paul. So I was on that board for 6 years, the last 2 as board president. So when I say that, I understand trying to make those difficult calls, especially when you're suddenly in front of a group of people and you're used to your commission or committee not necessarily having an audience, and they do all of a sudden. I understand what it's like. So I certainly want to make sure that tonight we cover not only things that relate to the law, but also what are some helpful tips for you, those of you who lead the boards, but also those of you who serve the boards, to make sure you have some practical skills of how to work in that structure, how to make sure you're not getting in trouble with some of the open meeting laws, and how to push back. So this, you all have copies of the presentation. It is 89 slides long, which probably terrifies you. Please don't be terrified of that. A lot of it is me putting down some sort of really trying to quote the actual statutes, the actual laws that we'll be talking about, for those of you who are interested in reading them. But I won't be going through all of them in detail. A quick disclaimer, because I am an attorney. This document is intended to provide an overview of very complex subject matter and is not intended as a comprehensive treatise, blah, 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 blah. If you have questions, please go to your staff member, please go to Ben, please go to the mayor. They'll pass them on, and we'll take care of it. Okay, everyone ready to get going? Great. So, first thing is the agenda. We're going to do the introduction. I think we've accomplished that. Next, we're going to take care of some housekeeping items, which, there we go. The agenda, which we're going over right now. Rules, part 1. Public service, meetings in general. Open meeting law, different types of roles. Minnesota government data practices, rules, part 2. And then we're going to end up with ethics. So the first thing with the introduction that I want to start out with is that my approach to meetings and what I'm going to talk to you about tonight starts from a place of values, because there's a reason why all of you are here. As the mayor pointed out, there are 145 people who care enough about their community, about your community, to serve on these boards and commissions. And that value that you have, that value of community service, the values that you bring into this position are really what underlie how you're going to act during the meetings, what those meetings should be run like, and what I want you to ultimately be thinking about when you're thinking about how do I make sure I follow the law. Because ultimately, all of these laws, all of these rules are coming from a place of values and making sure that we have good governance. So a couple housekeeping items. You'll notice there are some blue slides and there are some red slides. The red slides are the law. They're the black letter, as we call it in the biz, law. Whereas the blue slides are not the law. They are more things as examples or commentary or of tips and tricks. Finally, on all of your tables, there are 2 lovely blue things of sticky notes. If Ben, can you show everybody? Yep, thank you, Ben. Those are the sticky notes. Usually I am more than willing to write down all the questions you might have for me afterwards or during the meeting and say, I'll get back to you on that. Unfortunately, I can't write very well at the moment, and my left-handed writing is unfortunately not that legible. So I'm going to outsource that to you. So if you have questions that come up during the meeting at any point and we don't end up covering them, or if you just want to jot them down to remind yourself for later, please do so. They are there for you to take notes on, to give to me at the end, to give to each other, use a scratch paper, whatever you need. But it is definitely a way to communicate with me and get questions to me at the end. Finally, speak up. That we are being recorded, and so I want to make sure that as we are having questions and answers back and forth, that I can repeat the question and make sure that it is recorded. This also means when you do have questions, I will kind of break at the end of each section momentarily to say, are there any questions about this section? That is a fine time. I'll also leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, which again, you're all looking at me like I'm crazy because I still have 83 slides to get through in approximately a half an hour. But we're going to do this together. So, rules. Everybody's favorite thing. As I said before, our values really are what underlie the rules that we make and the way that we govern ourselves. And so when we talk about these types of values, by the way, this is one of those speak up points. What kind of values do you think you hold or that your community holds that are important to come out in the rules of how you govern yourself as commissions? Equity, that's a really good one. Yeah. Transparency, excellent. What else? Honesty, yep. What else? Welcoming, yeah, exactly. So these are the types of things that we look at and have looked at as a country, as a state, people who do this professionally as ethicists, and come up with a set of rules to try to recognize those values. So underlying all of these are really those values. So I want to talk about some, generally how we deal with ground rules for meetings. And there are some guides in the packet about what has been set forth by the Northfield Council as to what is decorum and everything like that. But I also want to talk a little bit more about the more informal meetings you might have, or just how you operate as a group in terms of meetings, and how to set those ground rules. So the first thing is to lead by example. So if you're going to be able to put some meetings together, have some good ground rules, you need to make sure that if the people who are leading the meeting are following those and are leading by example. I'm going to attempt to do this tonight, and by all means, call me on it if I don't, because I personally value honesty and I value feedback. And so I would welcome any feedback you have about that. As I said prior to this, I love meetings, and this is a meeting about meetings, which is incredibly exciting to me. But I'm going to tamp down my excitement a little bit because really what we want to talk about tonight is our goals. What do we value about this goal? And then how those rules come from those shared values. So for an example, we are all here to learn together tonight, right? That's kind of the point. We value participation, as someone said. So we can then come up with the rule as we kind of follow it to say that we respect questions and answers. So you're probably all wondering, why am I talking about these grand over things? Can I just give you the statute and tell you what not to do? Unfortunately, it is a lot easier for you to follow the rules if you understand what's underneath them and those guiding principles. So that's why we're starting here. The second reason we're starting here is because you are all in public service. I am going to make a bold assumption that you are all here because you want to be in public service, because you want to serve your community. As we noted, there are a lot of different ways that you do that here. And here we're going to get into some of those red slides, but as you all know, you work under the guise of a city. So in Minnesota, cities have different kinds of powers, and they are generally given to the city by either statute or through a home rule charter. In your case, Northfield, you're a charter city, you have a mayor council plan, you have boards or commissions. You should all hopefully know this, but it's important to talk about in the sense of there's the federal government right up here, and then there's the state governments, and as the state of Minnesota has said that cities can have certain powers and rights and responsibilities, and then the city has chosen to take some of those and put them down to smaller groups with your boards and commissions. So that's kind of where you fit in overall, which means you don't always get to talk about what's going on at the White House or the exciting news in Congress, or not exciting depending on how you feel about it, but it does mean that you have specific areas that you really are very influential in, and often they're the areas that are most important to people's actual lives. So I want you to remember that as we go forward here. There are a lot of public officials who are in city government. It's not just the mayor, city council members, and the permanent established advisory boards, but it includes all kinds of employees, the hospital board, other commissions, etc. The reason why this is important, and again, there's that, if you want to go see what the city code has to say about your board or commission, this is a lot of where it is. The reason why I bring up that many of you are designated as public officials is, again, because as we talk about values and public service, it is really not only from where you're sitting that you're public officials, because it might not always feel like that if you're just on a board or commission, but the public views you as public officials. So when we're talking about open meeting law, when we're talking about meetings and data practices, you're not just representing yourself, you are the government, the man, whatever you want to call it, for purposes of a lot of the public. And so there is a level of trust that comes with that, and a level of understanding that I want you to have of that's why many of these rules are in place. So this is a fun participation time. We have 2 quotes, and I'm wondering if anyone here, these are 2 of my favorite quotes on democracy in general and on our government system. Can anyone tell me who either of these quotes are by? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fictional people. These are by Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec, and from Jeb Bartlett from The West Wing. But I bring them up because I think they are both really good examples of both the characters and also those quotes, of the fact that what you're doing is important and the decisions get made by the people who show up and attend committees and do the work. And you're all here, and thank you for doing that. As Leslie Knope says, without those, our democracy dies. So please don't feel like what you're doing is unimportant just because it's a city board or something. It really is. And it's that base level that has such a long history in our country. So let's move on here to some of the nitty-gritty. So we're going to talk about meetings. The first thing we're going to do is try to define meetings, which means it is group activity time. So for 4 minutes, I would like you to talk in your little rounds there about these following topics. What types of meetings does your group hold? What are the purposes of those groups? What kind of public business do you think you conduct? What values do you think are there? What examples of meetings do you have you think are problematic? And why? So go to it, and I'll check back with you in 4 minutes. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for having those discussions. I know it was short, but hopefully it served a couple of important did a couple of important things. One is having you talk to each other, and secondly is to get you thinking a little bit about this. So I want to do a quick round robin. So a round robin is a way of kind of checking in with each group and seeing one thing that you thought was really interesting about the conversation you had. So very quickly, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to look around and point at someone at your table who's going to be your spokesperson. And then I'm going to start over here at this table and come to the appointed person and ask them what they think's interesting. Linda, what board or commission are you on, Linda?
Human rights.
Human rights, excellent. So what is one thing interesting from the conversation you had at your table?
Well, I think the values behind having open meetings. So that's because we want transparency, inclusion for all people, and opportunities for input from others.
Good.
So those are the values I think.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to this next table here. Yes, what is your name?
My name is Lance Heisler, and this is the Charter Commission. In fact, most of the Charter Commission is right here, and I think we just violated the open meeting.
I didn't hear that, so we're just going to ignore what you just said. But
Well, the conclusion is, I mean, there are enforcement provisions in the open meeting law, but
yeah.
My question is how is that done practically? Because many times our practical applications don't necessarily follow the black letter, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what we struggle with, that kind of thing.
That's a very excellent question and something we will definitely dive into here in just a moment. So thank you, Lance, and the rest of the commission. in the back there. Yes.
Bill Coleman, Planning Commission. Be prepared when you show up at a meeting.
Excellent. Always a good rule. And then following around in the back. Yes.
Michaela Schmidt, the city planner for Northfield.
Hi,
Michaela. We kind of talked about a lot of things, but I mean, we have a lot of groups and they all have a purpose. I think, so that was kind of what we started our discussion with, and that they're really important.
Excellent. Thank you, Michaela. Back here.
I'm Alissa Harrington, I'm the housing coordinator, and we also have the mayor here too. So we talked about how important our appointed committees and commissions are too, how we do a lot of the legwork and some of the research before we kind of move it forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make.
We were talking about how important our finance director is.
Yes, certainly I as the city attorney am very thankful for both the finance director and for you as well, Melissa, and I will get back to you with that scheduling question after this. So how about this next group here?
I'm Paula Granquist, I'm on the Arts and Culture Commission, and we just went through the list of questions. They wanted me to mention that we talked about the different kinds of meetings, so the regular meetings,
Yeah.
your subcommittee meetings, ad hoc sometimes, and I guess
That's great. Thank you. That's really important, and we'll get into that a little bit of what really constitutes a meeting. So let's go here. I guess I'm calling on. I was going to say.
Okay, I'm trying to capture this because we are doing we're going to have a rebroadcast.
Yeah.
It's available to the others that couldn't join us tonight here. So I listened to Mason, who's the recorder of the library board, and one thing I found interesting is beyond their monthly meetings, they over time, since you've been on for a while, they sometimes use committees and sometimes not to research issues, to bring back ideas from the community, to bring forward for discussion, to see how they can serve the community best related to the library and the various outreach and services. So I can share from that discussion.
That's great, Ben. Thank you. I think that brings up a really good set of values about how we get feedback and how that can be accomplished. So thank you, Mason. This next table here in the middle. Yes, you. Yes.
Barb Warrington, I'm with the Human Rights Commission. We have the Historic Preservation Committee and the Student Council.
Oh, okay.
I'm an educator. I think the things that most stuck with me is the idea of us as commissions and boards elevating ideas and concerns and issues to the council, but also to promote public civil discourse. and provide citizens with a way to express themselves and get those issues resolved.
Excellent. We're going to talk very much in a moment about what those are, and there'll be a follow-up on November 16th from Chris Hood. So look out for that. Last but very much not least, please, the table in the middle here.
Turn on for Sarah Carlson from the hospital board. The two things that stood out for me were, one, when the board or commission begin, when they're in the early stages, what it takes to get it going well.
Yeah.
And then also how important it is to have effective staff people who are getting the data in and getting us organized and all of that, and how critical that is.
Yes, thank you for that. Staff, I know there are a lot of, can all the staff members just raise their hands quick? Thank you. Seriously. It's absolutely correct. Without the staff, the boards and commissions really would have a difficult time, and as would the city attorneys. So thank you on all of our behalf. Well, great. Thank you guys for doing that. I think it really will help as we go through here. So the next thing I want to talk about is, what is a meeting? Obviously, it is any type of meeting that you would think of where you're calling the meeting, you're sitting up on a dais, you're sitting around a table, etc. But there are also these other areas that are also meetings under the law. So when we're talking about the open meeting law, we're talking about a meeting being any place, and places in quotations as being also the nebulous world of the internet or phones, where a quorum or more of the public body discusses public business. So do most of you know how to figure out your own quorums? Okay, good. So that's basically kind of the cutoff. And then discussing public business, which is why I wanted to have you guys talk about what is the public business that you all discuss. Because, it's not going to be a problem if, for instance, you all run into each other at the grocery store and are talking about how good the chicken is, right? You might have a quorum, but you don't have public business. Similarly, if two of you are meeting and having lunch and start talking about public business, as long as you don't fall into one of these other areas, that's not going to necessarily be a problem, because it doesn't have both the quorum and the public business. So a couple of these areas that are usually come up as questions and other things and are important for you to know. One, a social gathering. So the quorum of public body, looking around here, attends a banquet, ceremony, or similar event. Best practices are to basically, if you can, liberally provide notice that you could have a quorum, and don't discuss public business at unnoticed meetings. So all of you out here, best practice, don't discuss what's going on in your public business areas. The second big one comes up is before and after meetings. So, right, everyone has had the meeting before the meeting, and the meeting before the before meeting, and the meeting after the after meeting, right? So these things happen. We know they happen, but you want to make sure that and there's a reason for some of it, right? You might have to go to a person who is going to be introducing the resolution for you. You might be going and talking to the person about something else, or you might be asking if they can babysit your kid, right? There are legitimate reasons for it, but you really have to make sure that the best practice here is that there's not a quorum of people present, and that you never allow the discussion to expand to include a quorum when there is public business. Finally, this is the area that I will say is the number one, if you want to write this down, number one open meeting law violation that we see in our work. In fact, I was in another city last night, and as I was sitting next to the city administrator, we were listening to a discussion about a ordinance change, and she and I looked at each other and both wrote down open meeting law violation. Because what had happened in this city is that there was an ordinance change. It was a planning and zoning one. Don't have to get into the details of it. But usually the process would be that it went to the Planning and Zoning Commission. They would hold a public hearing, much like here. It would go to the council on the consent agenda and get passed. And so in this case, it did that. It went to the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was a public hearing. No one came and spoke about it. And then it was put on the consent agenda for the meeting last night. And sometime between the public forum, the public meeting, and last night's thing, a member of the EDA found out about this, and because it touched something that the EDA also touches, thought it should go through her committee. And the next thing you know, she's on the phone talking to a member of the EDA saying, I really think this should come to our committee and this is why. And then we hear that from the dais that one of the council members says, well, I talked to the chair, and suddenly we start counting. I talked to the chair yesterday, and I really think it should come to the EDA as well, as a member of the EDA. And we're looking at 3 out of 7. I'm like, okay. And then we find out, and I'll go to this because it's awkward otherwise, that there is, we hear from another council member that he heard from one of the EDA members that he had talked to the chair. So suddenly we're at a quorum who have all talked to the chair, all about the exact same thing. And then after the meeting, we find out that the other council member on the EDA had talked to the chair about it, and that the last remaining EDA member had called the mayor who was on the EDA to say that the chair had contacted him to talk about it. And suddenly we have a serial meeting. So a serial meeting is a meeting of less than a quorum held serially, meaning one after another after another. It is the comic book of meetings, where you don't get the whole thing in one, you get it time after time and again. And so it is a open meeting law violation if it's intended, and this is one of those areas where intention does matter, but I'll get to in a second about why intention may not matter as much. If it's one, to avoid public meetings, right? So the reason why, in my example, that the EDA chair was calling everybody and saying, hey, I think we should get this, I don't like this, I think it should come to us, was not in fact to do anything other than to avoid having the public meeting about it, and instead getting the council to have the public meeting about it. So they were trying to strategize. Secondly, fashion an agreement on an issue. Again, if you're just chatting about, who's bringing snacks to the next meeting, that's fine. Who has food allergies? That's totally fine. But if you're talking about actual city business and something that's relevant to your city business, that's a problem. Especially if you're trying to come to an agreement on it and say, well, I disagree with it because of these reasons. Don't you also, Michael, disagree with it? You do, don't you? Hey, can you talk to Beth about that? Can you call Beth? Tell her why you disagree with it? That's the kind of thing that happens, and that's where you get into trouble with these. And like I said, this is by far the thing that we see the most often. And one of the ways that this can happen, as I said, in the ether, is by emails. So for those of you on the City Council and for the Historic Preservation Commission and other areas, you've probably received an email at one point or another from either the attorneys or from Ben or from someone else that has blind copied all of you with information and has big warnings that say don't respond to all. That's to avoid that happening in email, because the Attorney General has opined that email does constitute a meeting. So no group chats. This also covers literally group chats. Don't have a group chat about business. Don't do that. And the only way for social media, as long as you are doing it just as a general member of the public, like if you, for instance, say, post on your personal Facebook page or even your public persona Facebook page, I think that we should make the city of Northfield's official color green. That's totally fine, and it's totally fine if the exchanges then, if other people on your board or commission or council respond to that, because that's available, it's in the public, it's available that way. But again, Facebook Messenger, private messages, anything like that, really problematic. Let's try not to get involved in that. To the point that was made earlier where that's kind of how do you do this in practice? Really, any communication you think of, I want you to think about that communication with that other board or commission member. I want you to go back to those same two questions of, is it public business that I'm talking about? That's the first one. Am I talking to this person about public business? If I'm talking to this person about public business, is this something that should be discussed in an open meeting? Would I want it to be discussed in an open meeting? And if the answer is yes, then the question to yourself is, should I really be talking to this person, or is it going to expand past just the conversation two of us are having to include a quorum of the people? So like I said, that's the one that really is the biggest issue that we see. And so I, as noted, am going to jump through some of these because we've basically covered it, and you can look at these, and get to some best practices. So best practices are when you have those committee meetings as well, comply with the OML, comply with open meeting laws, provide proper notice, make sure there's access to the meetings, or make absolutely sure there's no quorum, there's no action taken, no power wielded, nothing, that it's advisory only, that you meet only as needed, and you don't observe formalities. Yes, question? That is a wonderful transition. Thank you. That is exactly where I was going next. So the next thing I was going to talk about is like, okay, so I've presented all of this to you. Now, where do you think it should have stopped? And what could you have said? Because at any point, any of these, right, of all of these people, there are like 8 people involved in the example I gave you. All of them have had this training or a similar training. All of them know that a serial meeting is not okay because we drill it into people that it's not okay. So I'll turn it back on you. How would you have stopped that? Or how would you have questioned that? Yeah, the wandering microphone is.
Anyone could have just asked the question at some point, like, seems like we might be on dangerous ground here. Is this something that we should be handling more directly at the next city council meeting or something like that?
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful, because I think does a really good job of both preserving that relationship, right? Because you all have relationships with each other of different types, and there are different power dynamics, and I think that's a soft way to do it. Does anyone have a more assertive way that they could do it? That they could have stopped that chain? What about I'm not comfortable talking about this and just stopping it? How would you guys feel if you were asked to say that to someone else in your board or commission? Okay. Can we, as a big group here, talk about that if someone else says that you would respect that? Would you respect that, I guess? Okay. And understanding that it's not necessarily an accusation, but when it comes to these things, it tends to be, like in the example I gave, that first interaction probably wasn't an issue on its own. But when you start adding things on, they can become an issue really quick. Beth?
Well, if I'm understanding your example, did everybody know, like, so if 2 people have a conversation, that's okay, but they might not necessarily know that these other conversations are happening?
Yeah, it tends to be with serial meetings where it's, so in the example that I gave, it was really 2 people who were having meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. So, that's where we run into a problem. So, any other questions about open meeting law? Yes?
How do you calculate quorum if someone is abstaining or recusing themselves?
Oh, that's a good question that I'm going to ask you to write down on a Post-it note, and we'll get back to you on that. So, I'm going to quickly go through these very quickly because since it has been the pandemic, Many of you are much more familiar with these than usual, but basically meeting notices, you have regular, you have continued, you have special, you have emergency. The staff is very good about what those notice requirements are. They will help you with that, as will we. Remote meetings, individual participation is allowed under certain circumstances. And then, of course, when you get into an emergency situation like a pandemic, you can, of course, go ahead and do the entire meeting. As a reminder, one of the reasons we talk about and really hammer home the serial meetings, the open meeting law part, is because it is, in fact, can have an individual criminal penalty involved with it. It has a personal liability of $300 fine, which the city cannot pay for you. And if you get 3 of them, then you have to forfeit your public office. Also, the institution as a whole, right? Because when you're up there, remember what I said before, you're a public official. You're the government. And so there can be reasonable costs, disbursements, attorney's fees, and everything, up to $13,000 if you end up in litigation over one of these. You can have reversal of official actions. There's no reversal of kind of the action taken in violation of open meeting laws, but it's really bad press if it gets out there. And there's going to be increased scrutiny from the public and media, and it really does not work with what you are going to be, what those values that you have. And so that's where you kind of try to put that together. We kind of did the bonus group activity, which is, again, talking to each other about, can I say no? I don't want to talk about this. So that was your bonus group activity. So very quickly here with the roles in different kinds of meetings. So closed meetings. Generally speaking, as I said, your meetings are going to be open. You're going to be in the public. You're going to be talking about things openly. There are reasons why meetings must be closed and that they may be closed. Most of these things apply to the city council and the city council only, so I'm not going to go into too much of it, other than to say, if there is a closed meeting, we will help you with a script usually. Ben, the mayor, the city council members, and the city attorneys absolutely can help you through that. Again, OML violations are a thing. Want to quickly touch on this, quasi-judicial versus legislative. Please don't come at me. This is something that Chris Hood is going to be here to talk about on November 16th. He is my boss, so please remember that as I talk here. But I want to go through this very quickly because you'll get the nice version from me, and then you'll talk to Chris. Which isn't to say that Chris isn't nice. He is a lovely human being, but he has to be very black letter law about this in the situation he's going to be in then. So as bodies, some of you get to wear 2 hats. So remember when the mayor said at the beginning of my introduction that I've worked in all 3 branches of government? I really have. And so I have worked for the judiciary, I've worked for a judge, I've worked for the judge at the state level, and I've worked for a judge at the federal level. I have also worked at the state legislature, and I've worked even at my home city of Lino Lakes. And so I have worked for these different kinds of things. So what I want you to think of when you're looking at these things is the reason why we have a differentiation is because, like I said, I work for judges at the district court level, the state level, right? At the federal level. And when I was talking earlier about having the federal level of government, the state level of government, and then the city level of government, notice there's a level of judiciary missing there, right? So there is this quasi-judicial role that I don't have time, and you would be bored to death if I went into the history of it, but goes back to England and the idea of having basically parish or small town judges to deal with different kinds of disputes that you are now taking on. And so in this case, for quasi-judicial things, you have to pretend like you're a judge. And it's judge-like because it's quasi-judicial. So in this case, what you're going to be doing in those decisions is it's a case where the law is already made. The law exists. It is there. You can see it. It's written down. You are looking to determine what are the facts. These are the facts. You are the fact finder is what we call it for a district court. You're the fact finder. And then you take the law and you apply it to the facts. And so in that case, just like in the cases of in district court, no one can talk to the judge about the decision they're going to make. It's called ex parte communication. And as a judicial clerk, I wrote hundreds of letters back to people saying, this is an active case, this is a decision the judge is going to be making. It is against the ideas of fairness and transparency and having a neutral decision maker, which is the general thing with this quasi-judicial neutral, for him to even see this letter. So I'm sending it back to you, letting you know that, and thank you for your time. This is not an appropriate communication. So it really does happen in the judicial branch, and that is how ex parte communication is dealt with. In contrast, we have the legislature, which, is this about these things?
This is about leading by example.
Okay, please go ahead.
This session was billed as the art of effective boards and communications. We're due to be done at 6:55 with this part. We're less than halfway through. I have a hard stop. One of the ways of running an effective meeting that I've always appreciated is doing the time check at various points during the meeting. How do you think we should proceed?
I am going to quickly go through this because it was one of the areas that was brought up as specifically needing to be done. And then we're going to jump ahead because data practices don't actually apply to most of you as terms of you having to answer those. That is a staff issue. We're going to wrap up with about a minute on ethics and point you to those things and then open it up to questions. How does that sound? Sure. So very quickly, going back to the legislative. When you have your legislative hat on, that's the fun job, right? Like, you get to make the laws. That is, you have new ideas. That's the exciting part. You get to get all of that input. You get to talk to constituents. You get to look to the community for their best and brightest ideas and everything else, and you want that participation. You want the transparency in it, but you also want that really rich sense of participation. I specifically worked in constituent services when I was at the legislature. So when I got those letters, I said, that's a great idea. I will pass it on to your legislator. And sometimes I even got to write back to them and say, that's amazing. Can they meet with you? That's fantastic. Can we put that in a bill? How can we work with you with it? So there was really that back and forth that isn't allowed in that other area. And so I just wanted to touch that. And in this case, you're not looking at like what the law is. You're looking at what the law should be. And so it's really then you get to determine what's best for the community, not so much with the other. The memorandum is linked in here that Chris put together. Like I said, he'll be there on November 16th. Data practices, the big thing to know is that private, not public data may still be discussed at public meetings without liability if it is necessary to conduct public business. And then after that, most of these other things are things for staff, really, that have to deal with it. If you have questions about this, please do ask staff, but generally speaking, these are things that they will deal with themselves, although there are violations. Finally, with the rules, there are two rules. One, I wanted to do a quick demonstration. This is Robert's Rules of Order. This is a thing I've had a copy of since I was in 11th grade because I'm a huge geek. That is not what we're asking you to do in these meetings. Instead, we're asking you to, in all of your packets, you should have an appendix that has the rules of order for the council. It's a model document, it's 7 pages long. It refers to Roberts when more guidance is needed. I have 4 tabs in my giant thing of Roberts rules because past that 7-page document, these are the 4 things that I usually have to reference. So, that 7-page document is really going to be your best thing to do, and then you don't have to read about conventions. And the bit on ethics, I just want to leave you with this, the Walter Cronkite quote, "Ethics must be reintroduced to the public service to restore people's faith in government. Without such faith, democracy cannot flourish." And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about open meeting laws and all of that is ethics. And so there are different types of ethical things that apply to all of you. I put them in here so you could reference it. That's not what this training is about, but it is here for you to look at and peruse as you wish. And with that, I am ready for questions. Okay, well, in that case, I will just read the last thing here, which is just a couple of best practices. One, when in doubt, ask someone. Ask the person who's been on your advisory board or your committee or anything longer than you. Ask a staff member, ask Ben, ask the mayor. Don't directly call us because that's not proper, but definitely go to someone and ask the question. Ask your staff member. They are wonderful resources and very good at what they do. If you do not have ready access to someone else to ask, like if you're in that situation and you're deer in headlights, either abstain and just be like, I'm not comfortable doing this, or say, if you're in a more official thing, table the item, which officially is to place it on an agenda in the future, but close enough. You table it and do that. And finally, I'll just leave you with ethics is about trust. And so when you're thinking about open meeting laws and other things, make sure that you're asking yourself, what would I want to have happen in this situation for me to trust the person who is acting? So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben. Thank you.
All right, round of applause for